our last session of today with Salvo, and Trav is a data strategist for Draga 5 in New York. He works with major clients like MailChimp, Sprint, CoverGirl, and I just learned Under Armour. And he works to integrate rich learnings into every stage of their marketing campaigns. So welcome, Trav.
Thank you. All right, so today I want to talk about this picture right here. I'm sure a lot of you have seen something like this in like elementary school or I don't know, maybe high school or even college. Essentially, this is kind of an illustration about the left brain, right brain theory, which essentially says, you know, we are either left brain or right brain people, and that we're dominant in one of the two opposing sides. So the interesting thing here that I just want to point out is that most times when this is taught in school when you're young, it's that, you know, there's two types of people. There are people that have, you know, your left brain, which is the analytical side, right? It's about logic, language, reasoning, science, and math. You know, your number skills, and I kind of distill that down into, this is really the data side, right? And then you have the right side of your brain, which is your art awareness, you know, your intuition, your imagination. It's essentially the creative side of your brain. And I think it's really interesting, just this whole concept, because you're taught at a very young age, that there's this cool thing with the brain and how it's split into two different pieces. So just a quick raise of hands, how many people like would consider themselves a left side brain person, like an analytical thinker? Okay, I got a couple. I figured the data integrate, it would be a little bit more, but how about people who think that they're, you know, have the right side, the right, a lot of creative people. Okay, so I think everyone's wrong, because this is really just a myth. It's not proven in science that you can either be one or the other, and it perpetuates the idea that you're either good at math and logic, or you're good at art and creativity. And that, what I'm going to talk to you today is how we need to actually change this way of thinking, and this shouldn't be taught in schools anymore, because it really hinders innovation and it hinders the way that we think about data when we talk about it, and the way that we talk about creativity. So my presentation to you today is how we're going to switch up this, and it's called Creative Data. So, creativity and analytical thinking are not mutually exclusive. Some things that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to do a quick intro on myself, just to kind of let you know who I am, you know, my background, and why I am in a position to feel so passionately about this. I want to spend a lot of time on agency models. I come from an advertising agency, which I'll explain in a second, and a lot of people, especially in school, don't understand how advertising agencies are structured. I think I didn't even know what the strategy department did until I worked at my first advertising agency, because there's just a lot of confusion, and it's something that's not really important when you're learning theory and things like that, because a lot of different agencies structure their business in different ways, right? They're a business first, so they're going to have a business structure, but that's not really important when you've already selected the capability that you want to join. Then I'm going to go into some common misconceptions. So I'm going to go into things that people think and why they're wrong for thinking that when it comes to data. And I also want to go into like a lot of case studies, because I really am a strong believer to show good examples of work really inspires what you can do. And then I'm going to wrap everything up, and you know, we're going to leave this conference and go to Austin, so it'll be cool. All right, so hello, I'm Salvo. I'm a senior data strategist. I work at an agency in New York called Draga 5. I am a mountaineer, a proud mountaineer. I graduated in 2014. Kathy Mesro was one of my professors. I didn't join the IMC program, but I was an undergrad in advertising degree. So yes. And I've worked for a few agencies, so I've been in the industry counting, you know, I guess internships and part-time jobs for about 5 years now. And I've worked for a lot of different types of agencies, which is important because there's a million different types of agencies you can work for. Worked for digital agencies, I worked for analytics-specific agencies, I've worked for super traditional agencies that are like just like still doing print and everything. And I've worked for healthcare agencies. Today I work for a very, I'm going to call it an integrated agency, but it's essentially a creative agency, and it's Droga 5. And through my time, I've worked on a lot of clients. And I know these are a lot of blue chip clients, but I got my start in a lot of very localized businesses. I think for about 10 months, I worked at a search startup for a roofing company that would just put roofs on, and they needed to do like a search strategy. So it's not all blue chip clients. Right now, I'm actually, so of those clients up here, I'm working on Under Armour and MailChimp right now. But the reason I want to show you this is because out of all the agencies I've been to and all the brands that I've worked on, I've really learned like one overarching theme. Working on multiple agencies is that companies that silo data are outdated and less competitive. And what I mean by silo data is I mean companies that take data as a capability, right? You might call it like analytics or marketing science or something like that, and they put them by themselves. And they don't integrate them into the rest of the teams, and they kind of use them as an afterthought, really are less competitive, especially in the advertising space, and they're not really, they're not going to be able to compete in a couple of years. So that was a bold statement. So let's quickly level set. I just want to get everyone aligned with some of the ideas that I'm talking about today. So first, I'm going to focus this lesson on creative agencies. I'm coming from one. I think we can sit here and talk for hours. We talk about every different advertising agency model, but will be just really focused on creative agencies. That being said, the ideas that I'll talk about can transcend pretty much any business marketing industry. When I refer to analytics, so I'll talk about analytics a lot as like a capability. When I say capability, I mean like a department. So like you're in the analytics department. I'm using this as a catch-all capability. It's called marketing science some places. It's called data strategy some places, but we're just going to call it analytics today just to be simple. And so when I talk about data, it can be qualitative and quantitative. I think data is a buzzword, and I love data because that's what I do. It's in my job title. But at the end of the day, data is information. So this is not just spreadsheet data. This is survey data. This is everything. So just keep that in mind when we're talking and when we go into some examples. Cool. So the first model that I want to talk about is a traditional advertising agency model that I've seen, and I've worked for a couple of companies like this. And I like to personally call this the relay race agency model. And what that means, I'll get to in a second, but basically there are 5 core departments of any advertising agency. These are things that people don't really talk about how there are these 5 core departments in every single agency because as agencies come up, you'll have like a social media department and things like that. So I'm actually grouping those under media. But basically, you have strategy and planning, or they might call these account planners as well. These are essentially people who do the research. They do your audience work, things like that. You have creative, so these are like your art directors and your copywriters are coming up with big ideas. You have production, which is super important because their job is to make sure that they actually make the ads. So they're the people that are going on the shoots. They're pretty much translating all the scripts that the creative had and hiring the talent, things like that. Media, again, super important. In this traditional agency model that I'm talking about, the media is done in-house, but most times it's actually done out of a separate agency. But media is buying the TV spots. They are going online and talking to Google and Facebook and making those buys and planning your media mix. And then finally we have analytics. So analytics, as I said, is a catch-all term. These are the people that their job is to measure how well your campaign does, right? So they're coming in after the fact, after your campaign launches. They're measuring the effectiveness of your ads. They're optimizing, and they're doing things like that. So now that we know the departments of a core traditional advertising agency, there are 5 steps kind of required to run an advertising campaign from start to finish. I know people can disagree with this, but I think that this is a good way to start when you're talking about this, since there's so many different ways to make an advertising campaign. You first have strategic development, then you go to creative development, then production, launch, and reporting and optimization. And I think you can see where this is going. The relay race model is really where strategy and planning get the brief from the clients. And so their job is to distill all the information that the clients gave you into a brief that a creative can read and identify, where can we win, where can we lose, what should we do, what's the purpose of this campaign. The creative's job is then to take that brief from strategy and come up with some big ideas that will, accomplish the brief that the strategy gave to them. And then they're going to take whatever the outcome of that is, which is most likely, a television script or something like that, and your creative territories, and they're going to give that to production, who's going to go find the talent. They're going to go shoot the ad. They're then going to give that to media. Media is going to buy the TV spots, activate all the banner ads that you have, what have you, for the campaign. And then finally, you have analytics, which once the campaign is launched, analytics comes in and they say, okay, so this is doing well, this is not doing well. Next time we do a campaign, we should do this, this, and this. All right, so the problem with this type of model is that analytics is at the very end. Data is a pretty powerful thing. I think everyone likes to use the word in their businesses to say data can optimize and do better. And it can, and in most cases it was good for the industry for analytics to get in somewhere, and at the end it just seemed kind of right with the fast timelines that advertising has. But the real problem with this is that data can only influence a campaign at the very end, once it's live. And you can't really do much to a creative idea once your campaign's out there. It can influence the next campaign that you start, but then even then the timelines are kind of stretched. So this is just the inherent problem of this system. So I want to talk about the integrated model. Obviously this is the integrated conference, so they'll tweak to the names, but this is the model that the type of agency that I'm at right now is like, and this is like the first time I've really gotten to experience this type of model. Essentially, this is what it looks like. As you can see, they're not clear breaks in between each of the four capabilities. Like for example, in strategy and planning, they're working with creatives all the way through the entire process. It's much more fluid, but the most important thing here is that data and analytics is actually the spine of the entire campaign. It's the only capability in advertising that has a clear defined role at every single pillar of the process. And I think that's interesting because most people don't know that or think about that. Most people don't think that when you see a creative ad on TV or a creative campaign that's like out of home or something like that, that data influenced that at all. And so this is kind of an opportunity where I want to explain how analytics plays a pivotal role in almost every single step of the process, and a lot of different ways that you might not think. So these are kind of, you don't have to read all these things. I'll go through them like one by one-ish. But basically, these are all the different events that or projects that you're going to work on that get you to like a completely fleshed out campaign. So first we just want to talk about like strategic development. So this is really, and hopefully you guys can see that, but it's kind of like a bread and butter at the beginning campaign. So basically the clients are going to come to you and they're going to say, hey, we have this problem. We want you to fix it. What do you think? Our job is to look at the problem, and we have to come up with creative solutions for how to fix that. Sometimes that might be, their problem might be they don't know who their audience is or who they should be targeting or what to do at all. A lot of times in strategic development phases, where data comes into play a lot, is with audience profiling and sizing. We do a lot of the initial research, anything that's behavioral funnel related, triggers and barrier research. We do a lot of brand white space and personality analysis and consumer journeys. So there's a lot of different things that involve, and this is from surveys to business research to other things that are done in the very initial phases that most people don't know is really dependent on the data. So this can really get us to a good, knowing who to target, knowing the size of that target. I think that's super interesting that you have to know if your target audience is, not worth that much money, then you shouldn't be going after them, and you have to pivot your entire strategy around that. So next up is actually the measurement and learning plan. It's before the creative development. We always like to start off, knowing how we're going to measure and measure the campaign before the creative's even developed, because we want to know that we're hitting our goals, and the creative has to be designed to hit those goals. Because advertising, you can now measure how good it is, so you need to make sure it's good. Back in the day, you didn't have to do that. That's why the relay race model could work. Because you could put an ad out, and then if you didn't sell anything, you could say it's a bad product. Now, if you don't sell anything, you know it's from advertising, and your advertising didn't work. So you want to clearly define, what KPIs you're going to use and how you're going to really measure your campaign. Next up is creative development. So this is a weird one because a lot of people don't think data has anything to do with creative, but it can. I think here is a lot of, because creatives, their job is to come up with big ideas. Here, the data's job is to kind of keep creativity on track, keep it, level set to its goals, but it can also do things like, performance forecasting, so they can give us an idea and we can see, we can try to predict how well that would do. And also, data can inform idea curation, not creation or replacement or anything like that, but curation. So, you can get an idea and you can say, what if we did this? And then we can look at our audience and we can say, well, what if you did this and this, it would resonate with your audience more. Next up is production. I think this one's super interesting because this is somewhere data is very much influencing now, and that is with talent curation. So when you're going out and you're trying to see, okay, we're going to shoot an ad, which celebrity should we get in this ad? That's traditionally a production's job, but now it's becoming data's job. What you can do now is you can see, if you have a defined audience, you can now see, how much a certain celebrity resonates with them, or who's the perfect person to pick. All this is done with data, and it gives people not only the ability to select the right talent, but it gives them the ability to go to that talent and negotiate with them. Because you can say, hey, you're less resonant with our audience, we're only going to pay you this much. And we're just like, well, the data says, and they'll be like, all right, fine, I'll take that. So that's a very interesting way that data plays a role in advertising. Just something that kind of caught me off guard, and I've had to do it a couple times, and it's kind of cool. So obviously when you launch and you have production, you have to get tagging and you have to have a testing, A/B testing plan, which is more granular, finalized report design, and ultimately data actually helps with activation, specifically on digital, but also in other traditional cases. And then you get to the reporting, in-market testing, and optimization. So this is where you have your dashboards, you do your campaign reports. You also have ROI modeling and MMM research, which is more about attributing how well marketing is doing to business sales as a whole. I think this type of model really illustrates something interesting, that is, advertising is becoming less and less like traditional, like advertising, and it's becoming more and more of just business problem solving, where you're doing things that are not just TV anymore. You're doing a lot of business structure, a lot of everything from pricing models to actually creating products for a business now. And so that's just kind of the way that the industry is shifting. And ROI modeling is one of those things where you can actually you're doing that for a company. And most of the times, companies do that themselves, so it can kind of tell you your value to that company. So basically, an integrated model fits into every stage of the process. And this is not how it used to be. It used to be just at the end of the process. Oh yeah. The integrating data in every step allows agencies really to justify their decisions and make better work. And I think that's super important, because I'm going to show you some work later, and I think that you can see how data changes the creative concepts. And it actually does, it is important, because it can create really powerful work, it can create really important work, or it can just create badass work. But it's there and it's doing its part. So misconceptions about data, though, and creativity often hinder companies from adopting this integrated model. So this is the thing that that I see a lot is people have these thoughts and ideas about data, especially when it comes to data and creativity, that really force leadership at companies to be like, no, we should separate our analytics team from our creative team because analytics people don't know how to talk to creative people. Or the analytics team is doing their job, they need to run the numbers, but the creative team needs space, they need to be on the 10th floor because they're gonna, come up with really badass ideas. Or, I was at an agency where I never talked to a creative once, and I was there for 2 years. And they were on the same floor as me because we weren't allowed to talk to them. And it's, I didn't put that agency up on my list, by the way. So you can't, it's not up there. But no, it's just interesting to me, honestly, that and because of these misconceptions. So, misconception 1. Data scientists don't think creatively. I hear this all the time. I think it's more to do with the fact that they're data science. They're working with data all day. That's a left side of the brain thing. It's not a right side of the brain thing. So they can never think abstractly or be creative, which is just not true. Data scientists think creatively. They think just like everyone else. Their creativity, in some cases, is just a different form of creativity, which I'll show in the next case study. But a lot of times, I think it's bad to pigeonhole people that work with data as not being creative, because inherently everyone can be creative or analytical. It's not one or the other. So this is a really cool example that I like to show of just a campaign that was executed by data scientists to solve a creative problem, and it's pretty awesome. So I will like this.
In September 2014, we flicks in France. It was a big challenge with such a skeptical public. The only way to succeed was to be perfectly relevant. Luckily, we have the most adapted tool, Topics Model. Topics Model is a natural language processing system. It can transform a mass of everyday language into significant insights to identify a brand opportunity. We use this text mining approach to analyze 2 years of digital conversations and erase irrelevant data, the surface and the noise. It processed the data into different categories of meaning, sometimes from the same source. We use machine learning to train our algorithm to get better. This unique system enabled us to dive into the French mindset. We interpreted all the data with our knowledge of the local market to come up with 3 essential insights. The French love culture, but they're among Europe's biggest pirates. They love innovation, but they're skeptical of what's new. They love revolutions, but they're very conservative. Basically, we needed to break conventions without asking them to change. Thanks to Topics Model, we decided to create a platform inspired by you and came up with a creative revolution. A campaign made of GIFs, inspired by people's everyday life and typical French attitudes, connecting them to a good reason to watch Netflix. Skeptical? Try the Netflix platform for free. That's spoiler moment. Watch all episodes of Breaking Bad at once. Frustrated by all the waiting? Watch your favorite series instantly. Also, we use contextual data to address them real-time on more than 8,000 screens, when it rains, during the sales, or the holidays. The French identified so much of the GIFs, they put their skepticism aside and started to really love the brand. The brand awareness boomed in only 3 months, all thanks to data.
Cool. So, I have to do this every time. So the reason I like that one is because no one can look at that case study and say that's not freaking creative. And that was data scientists. It's solving a really complex problem in a really smart way, but doing it differently. It's being creative, but it's not just analytical thinking to solve a problem. It's thinking outside the box, using data as a tool, and then solving a problem. All right, so misconception number 2 is data can only be used to influence digital strategies. So I know the other presenters are not here today, but I was going to mention something to them, but a lot of times when people come and they think of data, they think of social media, or they think of banner ads, they think of Google, they think of digital, right? because digital has the data. But that's simply not true. Data can be used to influence any strategy, and I want to show a case study from Digitas Chicago of a really cool case study that shows you how data was the strategy, right? It was the influencing the strategy from start to finish.
In 2016, a nationwide survey found that 1 in 5 students struggles with access to clean clothes for school. This leads to thousands of students skipping school each day, contributing to a U.S. dropout rate of more than 4,000 students every day. Kids who drop out have a 40% higher unemployment rate, a 70% higher welfare rate, and are 8 times more likely to go to prison.
For any educator, they're aware that access to clean clothes can be a problem for kids. What we didn't realize was the magnitude of the issue.
With such compelling data, Whirlpool launched the Care Counts program to see if attendance rates would improve when students have access to clean clothes.
We installed washers and dryers into at-risk schools across the country, and we built custom data collection devices and installed them on each of the washers at each of the schools. So before each wash, a student ID was entered into the device, and this data let us see the actual connection between a student having clean clothes and its impact on their attendance.
Since the program has been in the school, my attendance is consistent. The goal is 90, we have over 90% all the time.
After a full year of data collection, we found that over 90% of students in the program improved their attendance, and the highest risk students were in school an additional 2 weeks more than the previous year. Beyond attendance, the program also impacted students socially and academically, with 89% increasing their class participation and 95% engaging in more extracurricular activities.
They went from kind of being embarrassed to this confidence level of, hey, look at me read.
If one story's going to stick in your brain today, I think it could be this one. Whirlpool.
It may seem a bit unusual, a washer-dryer leading to student success, but staff here say they've seen it work and it's changing lives.
How I feel with clean clothes, hanging out with my friends. I feel like nothing can stop me.
Of course, it's very emotional because it's a CAN submission case study. But I would say that this is cool because you think about analytics and you think about data and you think about what's my click-through rate or how many impressions do I have. They're actually measuring real-world things. They're measuring how many kids are going to school and they're correlating that to washing their clothes. Right? It's a very abstract idea, but it actually does something for a community. It not only helps your brand, but it helps us. It helps people, and I think that's a really cool example of how advertising can be effective for your sales, but also to be doing good at the same time. Okay, so man, let's do this each time. Cool. So the final misconception that I wanted to talk about was so something that's a little bit different, right? We always talk about how data can't be creative, or data scientists are creative, or data is only on digital. But I hear this a lot, that data will replace creativity. This is something that a lot of people talk about, specifically when you talk about like algorithms and you think about things like IBM Watson, right? And you think about things about like robots and AI taking over and how they can. I'm sure you guys have seen the AI voice that can, what is it, like you feed it a bunch of movies and it writes a movie script or something like that, and then they like try to reenact it. I think they did it with an Olive Garden commercial recently. But basically, this is not ever going to be true. Data will always complement creativity, and creativity will always complement data. They work together. One will never replace the other. Because and to be fair, creative industries are going to be the only real industries that will never be threatened by automation or robots or AI, things like that, because robots will never be able to think creatively. I hope so, at least. And so this is the other example I want to show about data not replacing creativity, but data complementing it. And this is like kind of an example of the best of both worlds when you have analysts and creatives and everyone just working together. This was done, I think, by JWT. Just so if anyone was wondering, that was an advertisement for a museum. That was kind of hard to get when you watched the first one, but I think it's a really good example of all right. We'll just skip to the beginning again, I guess. Okay, cool. It's a good example of how data really does complement creativity. That the idea of just trying to use data to predict what the next Rembrandt could look like is inherently creative, but it's only achieved through data collaboration. So really, we use data to solve problems, and different problems have different outputs. So sometimes data can look like this. This is honestly like 40 to 60% of my job is dashboards and understanding metrics and success and how does that look? What should we be doing? A/B testing. A lot of business development. People come to me and ask me like really weird questions, like how much should we be charging for this subscription model or something like that. That is a lot of times what our output looks like, and in most cases, that's kind of goes unseen, and you're kind of in the back. You're in the agency, you're doing important work, but you don't really see what the output is. But other times it can look like this. So I'm going to show you two campaigns that my agency did this year, and these campaigns, a lot of this insight, like they would not look the same if it wasn't for data, and just this integration approach of it being from the beginning throughout to the end. A lot of the insights for basically like the direction they took, their ability to sell in the idea, to take a risk. So let's start with the first one. I don't know if anyone watched the Super Bowl, but this is Crocodile Dundee.
For the new Dundee trailer.
All of a sudden, my news feed blows up. Danny McBride is the son of Crocodile Dundee.
Crocodile Dundee. Dundee.
Dundee.
Dundee.
The internet lit up when Chris Hemsworth appeared in the trailer for a brand new Crocodile Dundee film.
There's an official website and everything, DundeeMovie.com. And they're like, what is this? I actually want to see it.
And it's massive here in Times Square.
You're right there, mate. Just get a clean shave on my shit
there. Now the best look yet at Dundee. It features Margot Robbie and Hemsworth, Hugh Jackman, Russell Crowe.
Speculation is building on whether the movie may just be part of a Super Bowl ad.
Tourism Australia. Now, they haven't really commented on this one. It is a little talking about. Midway through the commercial, they start talking about 37,000 miles of pristine beach, mate. And then David White says,
wait, hold up. This isn't a movie. No. It's a tourism ad for Australia.
Yes. It was a commercial.
Chris Hemsworth's Dundee movie has been outed as a big marketing stunt.
You thought you were watching a trailer for Crocodile Dundee, which I just thought was hysterical. It's more success than any film I've ever did.
I wanted to say Australia, but it turns out Danny McBride just made that up for a movie. It's not a real thing.
Fans are fighting to make the sequel a reality. The director of Avatar wants to know when he can start shooting. I truly
One hell of a sales pitch right here.
It made me want to go right away.
Makes you really proud to be this day. It makes me want to go to Australia. Australia was beautiful.
The reach has certainly been impressive.
All for a Super Bowl ad that's going to be one of the best in history.
You're the best Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee.
Really?
So full disclosure, I didn't work on this ad. This was a lot of like really talented people on my team and every department in our agency. Data was really integrated from the beginning to the end. There are a couple things, like people did like kind of understand that it was an ad at some point, and we kind of noticed that through like listening to our audience and actively monitoring. And then they had to pivot and come out with a red band trailer and things like that. So there was a lot of like drama with this particular account, but I think it's a good example of what happens when everyone in your agency is really working together for one common goal. You can do stuff that's just very creative but very effective and something that works. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.